I've always been a Eurosceptic. I believe that the institutions are profoundly undemocratic and they're in need of reform. In the ideal world, I'd like to see a meaningfully reformed European Union, more democratic, more accountable, more decentralised. That's what I'm hoping. The Prime Minister's got a very, very tough job. It's not a job that anyone would envy.
Has
and
he
I wish him well.
that in
well,
this?
we're not there yet. We're going to, and I've.
But you know what's in it.
Well, I dispute that. There is time to go, and I have always said, since this process began, that I would wait for the Prime Minister to make his final offer to the British people, and that I would take a view, like everyone else, like your viewers, on whatever is in the national interest, whatever is in London's interest.
Are you being a bit coy because basically you are a sceptic, as you say, and London happens to be the second most pro-EU part of the country after Scotland?
I will take a view, and a public view, clearly, once the PM returns with the final offer.
We're only 2 days away. Come on, give us a clue.
The key thing is that whatever we decide to do, it has a democratic mandate. I've campaigned for a referendum for years. I'm thrilled with where we're at. I wish the Prime Minister well. And I, as a courtesy to him, I will wait to see what he comes back with in a couple of days.
Do you think the migrant provisions, the benefit change, the plan change, do you think that will be significant on, say, affecting the labour force in London?
I'll tell you what, look, I have committed to not getting involved in the discussions until we hear back. I'm very happy to come back and talk about the deal that's there. It matters, it's a huge issue. The job of the mayor is not to take us in, take us out of Europe or keep us in Europe. The job of the mayor is to make whatever decision the British public make work for London. And I'm confident that whatever decision we make, we have a huge, bright future. We're a big city, a global city, in a big country. It'll work, whatever we decide.
Let me ask this sort of bigger question then about whose side you're on, which in a way, I know it's a slightly simplistic question, but I think people do worry that the balance between, if you like, corporate London, the bankers, and the bohemians and the others, that it's tilted too far away. Does that worry you?
I think this is a real issue for London. I don't think anyone can doubt that London has boomed over the last 8 years under Boris Johnson. We are on the map as the most important city in the world. We excel not just in financial services, but right across the board. Culture, media, tech, it's a huge success story. But at the same time, there is a real concern among Londoners, a significant number of Londoners, that they're being priced out of their own city. And that is a real problem. So it's the reason I'm standing for mayor, is to try and protect that success that Boris can take some credit for, much credit for in my view, but to make sure that it works for people across the board. And the biggest problem London faces is housing. I hear what Joe Valentine has said in terms of the business concerns, but actually every single business I've spoken to has put the housing crisis at the top of their list. That is the biggest concern. If people can't afford to live in London, that has ramifications for our businesses as well.
Let me give you a sort of litmus test question on this, because it's sort of interesting one. A lot of people have been critical of property developers and the deals they've run with local authorities. Sometimes they're paying local authorities to get out of the obligation to build social housing in their property development. Just in a sentence, you obviously think they should all build their social housing commitments, their target commitments. They shouldn't be able to bribe their way out of those.
Of course, every single application that crosses the mayor's desk should be interrogated with a really robust approach to ensure that we get the maximum possible affordability out of it. And there's a different amount of fat in every proposal. What I've said, though, and I think this is really important, is that all new homes built on publicly owned land, which will be the bulk of the new homes we have over the next 4 to 8 years, should be for Londoners and Londoners first. Absolutely. There is no point building vast numbers of homes if they're bought by overseas investors and left empty.
In a word, affordable
resentment.
Housing on private land where you give planning permission for a development. There's a commitment, an obligation to build some affordable housing. Are you going to enforce that? Because a lot of people... Yes.
Absolutely right.
So it'll be tougher on developers. You will be tougher on developers.
You interrogate every single application.
And you will be tougher on developers.
Absolutely right. I will drive a very hard bargain because the housing crisis is the #1 issue for the next mayor, whoever's elected.
Wealth isn't an issue in London because there are many wealthy people in London, many poor people in London. Background might be, because, of course, being able to understand the needs of everyday Londoners is an issue. And I just wonder what your answer is going to be to the voters as the campaign takes off about the background of Eton and
the same is true of being an MP. And if you look at my record as a working MP, I was elected 5 years ago in what was then a comfortable Lib Dem seat. And I won that seat against the odds. In the last 5 years, I've worked every single minute I've had on behalf of my constituents. I've held government to account where I've needed to. I've delivered day after day for my constituents. And at the last election, I was rewarded with the biggest increased majority of any incumbent MP in the country. So I will do my best over the next 78 days to talk to every single Londoner, but I won't succeed. There are 8.5 million. And for those people I don't meet, they will take reassurance, I hope, from the fact that the people who know me best know that I have campaigned and worked relentlessly on their behalf over the last 5 years, which is why I've been rewarded with a massive thumbs up from those same people. And I think that matters.
Right. Let's talk about tax, if we may. It's been a big issue, hasn't it? And again, it gets to this issue between a kind of corporate London, a corporate Britain, and one for ordinary people. What was your reaction to the Google tax deal?
Right, much the same as everyone else's reaction.
You were angry about it.
We absolutely. I think everyone was angry. We have a situation in London where our high streets, which are the heart of our different communities, are suffering. They're facing high rents, very high rates. They've got parking issues in some boroughs that are awkward. They're up against a rapid trend towards online shopping. They're right up against it. The last thing we want is our high streets to go under, and yet they are in an unfair competition with companies that are able to use provisions and mechanisms that are not available to our high street shops. So, of course, it causes resentment. I want a fair playing field. I want an even... I'm all for competition, but it's got to be a fair competition.
And your own tax affairs, do they compromise your ability to speak out on that issue? Because you were yourself a non-dom, weren't you, until 2000?
I've always been tax resident in the UK. I've always lived in the UK. I've always lived in...
It's a red herring to say tax resident in the UK.
It's not a red herring.
Because if your assets are offshore and you're a non-dom, you don't pay tax on the overseas assets.
I've always lived in the UK. I've always lived in London.
Well, that's why it's so remarkable you were a non-dom.
Let me answer your question. I've always paid full tax on my income in the UK since I've been paying tax.
Have you always paid full tax in the UK on your worldwide income?
I've always paid full tax because I've always lived in the UK. And the thing about non-dom, which I'm sure you understand...
It's your worldwide income that you don't pay tax on. You do pay tax on your British income.
Let me just explain. My father died around 20 years ago. I became non-dom when age 20, 21, however old I was at the time. Being non-dom allows you to make lifestyle choices to avoid paying tax. But I've always lived in the UK. I have an income which comes to the UK on which I've always paid full tax. So it's an academic discussion.
So you explicitly deny people who've said on the sort of back of envelope calculations that you save millions by being non-dom?
I don't think anyone says that. I don't think anyone says that. I've never been accused of not paying tax. I've always...
No one's accusing you of illegality.
Yeah.
But being a non-dom...
Yeah.
Well, explain to me this. Why is your family office, which looks after, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets, why would that be in Geneva when you are standing to be mayor in a city that has the greatest business services and financial sector in the world?
I have a huge family. It covers every continent in the world, more or less.
You can't persuade them to put it in London. Let me answer
your question. My father, I'm one of very, very many siblings and members of the family. My father was an international businessman. He established an overseas trust before he died. I'm a beneficiary of that trust, but it's a blind trust, and I have absolutely no control over it. What I do have control over is the income I get. And that income I get is subjected to the full tax regime in the UK and has always been.
Will you publish your tax return? It was published by the Boris and Ken Livingstone published their returns at the last mayoral election. Will you publish yours?
Of course I will. And I think all candidates should in this election. And if this is something that the candidates agree to do, then I will, of course, do that. I fully anticipate doing that.
Zac Goldsmith, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.